The promise. There are places from your childhood that stay with you, even after the details start to fade. You might forget exactly how you got there, and you might forget the names of the roads, but you remember how the place made you feel. For Daniel, that place was somewhere deep in the mountains. His father had taken him there twice when he was a boy. Daniel couldn't have been more than 8 years old the first time. He remembered hiking for what felt like forever, complaining about his feet hurting, and asking his dad every 10 minutes if they were almost there. And then they stepped out of the trees. Daniel never forgot what he saw. The trail opened onto a overlook high above the valley. Mountains, they stretched miles in every direction. There was a lake far below them that caught the evening sun and looked almost like a piece of glass. Even as a kid, Daniel remembered just standing there, quiet. His dad laughed and put his hand on his shoulder. Worth the walk? Daniel nodded. It was. His father took him back one more time a couple years later, and then life happened. Daniel got older. His father got older. They talked about going back someday, but they never did. By the time Daniel was 31, his father had been gone for almost 5 years. But Daniel still thought about that place. And when he decided he was ready to ask Emily to marry him, there was only one place he wanted to do it. He wanted to take her to that overlook. He wanted to stand in the same place he'd once stood beside his father. And when the sun started dropping behind the mountains, he was going to get down on one knee. At least, that was the plan. Daniel didn't tell Emily where they were going, only that he wanted to take her to somewhere special. She agreed immediately. Emily loved hiking. She loved being outdoors, and Daniel knew she loved the view. They packed light, very light. The hike was only supposed to take a few hours each way, and they were planning to spend one night near the overlook before hiking back the following morning. Between them, they carried one large backpack. Inside were sleeping bags, food, water, a flashlight, a small first aid kit, a lighter, and a few basic camping supplies, and whatever else they thought they'd need. Daniel carried the backpack. Emily carried the rolled-up tent. They left early that morning. At first, Daniel was confident. He recognized the general area. He remembered the dirt road his father used to take. He remembered parking near an old wooden sign before starting the hike. Except the sign wasn't there anymore. Neither was much of the road. I guess years of storms and overgrowth had changed everything. Daniel found what he thought was the old trail, and they started walking. For the first couple of hours, everything seemed fine. Emily kept asking him what was at the end. Daniel would tell her, "You're going to ruin it." "I'm just asking." "And I'm just not telling you." She smiled. "So it's worth all this?" "It will be." That answer seemed to satisfy her. For a while. Around midday, Daniel began slowing down at every trail split. There weren't many trail markers. Actually, there weren't any. And several times he stopped and stared into the woods as though expecting something familiar to suddenly appear. And Emily noticed. "You know where you're going, right?" Daniel looked back at her. "Of course." She raised an eyebrow, and he smiled. "Mostly." "Daniel?" Listen, I came up here when I was just a kid, so it's been a while. How long is a while? About 20 years? Emily stopped walking. 20 years? Daniel laughed. It hasn't moved. The mountains hasn't, but the trail might have. He couldn't argue with that. They kept going. Another hour passed, then another. Daniel started looking at his phone more often. No signal. The map he downloaded wasn't much help because the small trails weren't marked. By late afternoon, Emily stopped joking about it. Daniel did too. They were lost. He didn't want to say it, but eventually Emily did. We're lost. Daniel looked around, trees in every direction. I think we probably got turned around back at that creek. That was 2 hours ago. I know. So what do we do? Daniel looked towards the sky. They still had some daylight, but not much. The temperature was already beginning to drop. Going deeper into the forest trying to find a trail in the dark would be worse. We stay here tonight. Emily stared at him. Here? Yeah. We set up the tent, get a fire going, eat something, and tomorrow morning we backtrack. She didn't look thrilled about it, but neither was he. She nodded. Okay. They found a small clearing between the trees. It wasn't the beautiful overlook Daniel had imagined. Not even close, but the ground was fairly level. They put up the tent and gathered enough deadwood to make a fire. Within a half hour, the campsite almost felt comfortable. Almost. Emily sat close to the flames while Daniel heated up their food. So, she said, on a scale from 1 to 10, how badly did you screw this one up? Daniel smiled. Maybe a 4? 7. Okay, 5? 8. Fine, 6. Emily laughed. Daniel looked at her across the fire. For a second, he thought about the ring. It was buried in the backpack inside a small black box, wrapped in one of his shirts. He'd consider bringing it out. Maybe proposing to her right there. It wasn't the place he'd planned, but Emily was there, and they were together. Maybe that was enough. Then he looked around at the dark trees. No. He'd find the overlook tomorrow. He wanted to do this right. After they ate, they sat beside the fire, talking for a while. Neither one mentioned being lost anymore. Daniel fed the last few pieces of wood into the flames. Emily stood up and stretched. I'm exhausted. Go ahead. I'll clean this up. You coming? In a minute. She disappeared into the tent. Daniel packed away what little food remained. Then something his father had taught him came back to him. Never keep food near your tent. Bears. Daniel didn't see any sign of one, but they were deep enough into the wilderness that he wasn't going to take a chance. He put all the food, wrappers, and anything else that smelled like food into a bag. There was a tree about 30 yards from the tent. Not huge, but tall enough. Daniel climbed several feet, worked his way up onto the thick branch, and tied the food bag as far away from the trunk as he could manage. When he climbed back down, Emily was watching him from the tent. What are you doing? Keeping breakfast from becoming somebody else's dinner. She looked towards the bag hanging in the tree. Bears? Probably nothing to worry about. That's comforting. Daniel laughed. Come on, we're fine. He kicked some dirt over the fire until only a soft, orange glow remained. Then he crawled into the tent. They zippered it closed. Daniel lay beside Emily in the darkness. For a while, they could hear insects outside. Occasionally, something moved through the leaves. Probably something small. A squirrel, a rabbit, or maybe a raccoon. At least that's what Daniel told himself. Eventually, the forest became background noise, and they fell asleep. Daniel didn't know what time it was when he woke up. For several seconds, he wasn't even sure what had awakened him. Then he heard it again. A low sound. Deep. Almost like a grunt. Daniel opened his eyes. It was still completely dark inside the tent. Emily moved beside him. "You awake?" Daniel whispered. "Yeah." Another sound came from outside. Closer this time. A rough snorting noise. Then something cracked. A branch. Emily grabbed Daniel's arm. "What is that?" Daniel didn't answer. He listened. Something heavy was moving outside. Leaves shifted. Branches snapped. Then came another growl. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. It wasn't a raccoon, and it wasn't a deer. Emily whispered his name. "Daniel." "I know." "What is it?" He already had an idea, and he didn't want to say it. Another loud crack came from somewhere beyond the tent, from the direction of the food. Daniel slowly sat up. "Stay here." "What are you doing?" "I'm gonna look." "No! I'm not going outside." He reached for the zipper. Emily grabbed his wrist. "Daniel, don't." "I just want to see." He moved the zipper down slowly, an inch, then another. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Daniel stopped, waited. Nothing. He opened a few inches more. Cold air came through the opening. Daniel leaned towards it. At first he saw only darkness, then his eyes adjusted. And he saw movement near the tree, something large, very large. Daniel opened the zipper a little more. Emily leaned beside him, and they both saw it. A grizzly bear. It was standing beneath the tree where Daniel had hung the food. The bag was already on the ground. The branch Daniel tied to it had broken. The bear had torn the bag apart. Food wrappers and pieces of what was supposed to be their breakfast was scattered around its feet. Emily stopped breathing for a second. Daniel could feel her trembling against him. The bear was enormous. Much bigger than it had seemed in photographs or videos. It tore at something on the ground, then suddenly stopped. Daniel froze. The bear lifted its head. For a moment, it simply stood there. Then it turned and looked directly towards the tent. Emily pulled away from the opening. Daniel slowly closed the zipper. Neither of them spoke. They sat there in total darkness, listening. Nothing. Maybe it hadn't seen them. Maybe it would go back to the food. Then they heard the leaves. One heavy step, then another, coming closer. Emily covered her mouth. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds passed, then something brushed against the side of the tent. Emily jumped. Daniel grabbed her and pulled her into him. The bear sniffed loudly outside the thin fabric, There was nothing between them and it except nylon. The bear moved around the tent, sniffing, stopping, moving again. Then it pushed against one side. The entire tent shifted. Emily let out a small scream. The bear reacted immediately. A roar exploded outside. The side of the tent collapsed inward. Daniel shouted. Everything happened at once. The bear struck the tent again. Fabric ripped. One of the poles snapped. Emily screamed. Daniel grabbed the backpack. Get out! What? Go! He shoved it towards her and pulled open the opposite side of the tent. Run! Emily didn't move. I'm not leaving you! Another hit nearly flattened the tent. Daniel pushed her towards the opening. Emily, run! She crawled out. Daniel followed. The bear was on the other side of the collapsed tent. Emily took several steps before turning back. Daniel stood between her and the bear. Go! She hesitated. The bear charged through what remained of the tent. Daniel yelled and threw his arms out, drawing its attention. Emily screamed his name. Daniel looked back at her only once. Run! So she did. She ran into the trees. Behind her, she heard shouting, then the bear. Then Daniel screamed. Emily kept running. Branches tore at her arms and face. She fell once, got back up, kept going. She had no idea where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stop. Eventually, Daniel's voice disappeared. The forest became silent again. Emily ran until her legs wouldn't carry her anymore. By then, there was a faint gray light beginning to appear through the trees. Morning. She collapsed against a fallen log. For a long time, she sat there crying. Every part of her wanted to go back, but she knew what she had heard. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew Daniel had made sure the bear followed him instead of her. She stayed where she was until there was enough daylight to see. Then she started walking. She had the backpack, the one Daniel shoved into her hands before she ran. She checked the phone. Still, no service. She chose a direction and kept moving downhill. And hours passed. Eventually she found a creek. She followed it, then an old trail. Then sometime that afternoon she heard an engine. She stumbled onto a dirt forestry road just as a truck came around the bend. The driver saw her and stopped. Within hours, authorities were searching the area. Emily told them everything she could, where they had started, how long they had walked, where she thought the campsite might be, and search teams went back into the forest. They found the destroyed tent. They found what remained of the food bag, and they found Daniel. He hadn't survived. Emily didn't want to hear the details. There wasn't anything anyone could tell her that changed what happened. Daniel was gone. Later that evening, Emily sat wrapped in a blanket at the ranger station. Someone brought her the backpack, Daniel's backpack, the one he'd pushed into her arms. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Everything inside had been thrown around during her escape. A flashlight, the first aid kit, an empty water bottle, and one of Daniel's shirts. She pulled the shirt out. Something fell from inside it. A small black box. Emily stared at it. She picked it up. Her hands began shaking before she even opened it. Inside was a ring. For several seconds she simply looked at it. Then she noticed a small folded up piece of paper tucked beneath the ring. Emily opened it. There were only a few words. Daniel's handwriting. The place my dad showed me. The place I'll ask Emily to spend her life with me. she covered her mouth, and suddenly she understood. The secret destination, why Daniel had been so determined to find that particular trail, why he wouldn't tell her where they were going, why the trip had mattered so much to him. He had taken her into those mountains just to show her a beautiful view. He had planned to ask her to marry him there. Daniel never found the overlook that day. He never got the chance to ask the question he carried into those woods. But Emily kept the ring. And years later, whenever anyone asked about it, she never called it an engagement ring, because technically, Daniel never got the chance to propose. She called it something else. A promise. From a man that had gone into the mountains hoping to spend the rest of his life with her, and gave the rest of his life so she could make it out.